So, in this video, we are going to lay out the 5 most common cardio mistakes that people make when trying to lose fat. Now, let me start by saying that while this video will focus on the biggest pitfalls of cardio, we here at Fusion Fitness X2 are still big believers of cardio in the right context and when done the right way. So, let's dig into some of the biggest mistakes that we see people make, and some recommendations. The first mistake is that of poorly timing cardio around weight training. One of the most important things to consider with cardio is whether or not it's likely to impair your weight training performance, usually referred to as the interference effect. This interference effect is the reason why there are so many memes that cardio is killing your gains. And while I do think the idea has been overblown by bodybuilders who just don't like doing cardio, there still is some truth to it. There is a well-established conflict between the aerobic endurance pathway and the muscle building pathway. And there clearly are smart things you can do to help squash that interference. Perhaps the simplest way is just by doing your weight training first. For instance, you can do a 5 to 10 minute warm-up on the treadmill, or whatever machine you like, as this has been shown to improve subsequent weight training performance, but doing a formal cardio session that takes longer than 10 minutes or so should be done either after weights or at a separate time altogether. A 2017 systematic review and meta-analysis on concurrent training, which pulled the results of 13 studies, found that placing cardio immediately before weights resulted in significantly worse improvements in one's rep max strength when strength training is done within 6 to 8 hours following cardio endurance training. Now, obviously, the extent of that compromise depends on how long and how intense the endurance training is. But still, these authors suggest that separating endurance and resistance exercise by 24 hours, where possible, could be a useful strategy to optimize concurrent training adaptations and avoid acute interference. We should also say that the interference effect is more of a concern for advanced fitness persons than it is for beginners. A recent 2021 meta-analysis found that concurrent cardio and weight training had no impact on strength for untrained and moderately trained individuals, but did significantly impair strength in more well-trained individuals. So the bottom line is that if you really want to knock out your cardio and weights in the same session for convenience, you should do your cardio last. And the more advanced you get, you must create more separation between your cardio and weight training, whether that means by doing them on separate days or by doing one in the morning and the other in the evening. This brings us to the second mistake, which is simply thinking that cardio is as effective for fat loss as diet. This is definitely not true. Even though cardio exercises are undoubtedly important for health and fitness, they are not necessarily required for weight or fat loss. This is because at the most fundamental level, weight and fat loss ultimately comes down to the difference between the number of calories you consume and the number of calories you expend. And the number of calories you expend in a typical cardio session is pretty low. For example, if you weigh 170 pounds or 77 kilos, it would take you roughly 3 hours of brisk walking to burn 1,000 calories. But you could eat 1,000 calories in less than a minute without much effort. Actually, fitness model Steve Cook demonstrated this disparity quite well when, as a response to the 10,000 calorie food challenge, he tried to burn 10,000 calories the next day, and despite being one of the most physically fit guys in the industry, he still couldn't do it, and in the end, he only managed to burn just over 7,000 calories, so it's definitely much easier to eat calories than it is to burn them, and even worse for cardio, as new research shows that weight loss from cardio only amounts to only 20% to 50% of the weight loss. Therefore, from a fat loss standpoint, I think cardio should be used as a supplemental tool that assists your diet rather than the engine of fat loss itself. Moving on to mistake number 3, which is falling into the high-intensity trap. Now, coaches tend to break up cardio into one of 2 categories, namely low-intensity steady-state cardio, abbreviated as LISS, like when you brisk walk on a treadmill. Then we have moderate-intensity steady-state cardio miss, for example, walking on an inclined treadmill. And thirdly, there's high-intensity interval training, or HIIT, which involves high exertion for 20 to 30 seconds or so, then go at a light pace for 2 to 3 minutes, and then repeat that for usually 5 or 6 intervals. Now, a lot of people seem to think that HIIT is more effective at burning fat because of the so-called caloric afterburn effect. While the afterburn effect certainly is real, you will burn more calories after high-intensity exercise than after low-intensity exercise, which is logical. One study showed that even after 80 minutes of high-intensity cardio at 80% max heart rate, only an additional 80 calories were burned from the afterburn effect. In fact, a more recent systematic review stated that the afterburn effect is unlikely to account for any apparent greater fat loss potential. But even if we put the afterburn idea aside, it still has the appeal of being more time efficient, since you can burn the same number of calories in as much as 40% of the time. Another upside of HIIT is that people find it to be less boring, and I do think that's a perfectly sensible reason to use it. However, while the time efficiency and enjoyability of HIIT can count as upsides, the biggest downside is that it does tend to interfere with weight training more and takes longer to recover from. You could also argue that HIIT is more redundant since weight training and HIIT are actually quite similar physiologically. With the typical moderate to high rep weight training, you go at a high exertion for 20 to 30 reps, rest for 2 or 3 minutes, go at a high exertion again for another 20 to 30s, and repeat. Some experts have said that you already get most of the benefits of HIIT through weight training. I'm not sure I completely agree with that. In my experience, HIIT does increase heart rate more and present a greater cardiovascular impact than typical weight training, but it does still knock the unique value of HIIT down a few notches. So if you are going to use HIIT to complement weight training, we would advise you use it more sparingly because of its higher recovery time demand. Okay, so mistake number 4 is doing too much cardio overall. Even if we do everything else right in terms of timing and intensity, it is still possible to do too much cardio. To give us some idea on this, let's take a look at the results of this NSCA meta-analysis on the interference effect. When it came to cardio frequency, they noticed a drop-off in hypertrophy around the 3rd or 4th day per week zone. Although to be fair, the correlation wasn't that strong, so it's more of a trend to be aware of. It isn't like your muscle is going to melt away if you do cardio more than 3 or 4 times a week. They also showed negative correlations between hypertrophy, strength and power, and the length of endurance exercise per day, with more interference seen as you go higher above 30 minutes per day. Still, we shouldn't look at this frequency and volume data in a vacuum, because taking your pet for a walk isn't comparable to running suicide sprints. And so, what we recommend for cardio will be highly individual and depend on the type of cardio you're doing. And we'll break all that down here in a minute. First, let's quickly cover mistake number 5, which is banking on fasted cardio for extra fat loss. Now, the bottom line with fasted cardio is that just because you burn more fat during the session itself doesn't mean that you'll lose more fat overall. In fact, a 2011 study found that when you burn more fat during a cardio session, you burn less fat over the next 24 hours. And this systematic review found that performing size in a fasted state did not influence weight loss or changes in lean and fat mass, and that a meaningful caloric deficit is more important than exercising in fasted or fed states. A recent review paper from Escalante and Barakat looked at the research on fasted cardio in the context of competitive physique athletes, people trying to get to very low levels of body fat. And while they once again acknowledged that there is no conclusive evidence on the superiority of fasted cardio, they do point out that research on physique competitors hasn't been performed and leave the question of whether or not it might be beneficial in the final stages of fat loss open. They also suggest that protein-enhanced cardio, where you consume about 25 g of protein beforehand, might have a slight edge in some advanced cases. But still, I think that for the most part, you should simply do your cardio at a time when you can stick to it the best, irrespective of whether you're doing it fasted or fed. Okay, so what are our practical recommendations here at Fusion Fitness X2? Well, when it comes to volume, we suggest including cardio as needed to keep up with your desired pace of fat loss. Generally, losing about 0.5 to 1% of your body weight per week is a good range. If you're able to do this with weight training and diet alone, then you don't need to do any cardio. But we almost always include at least some, because it will allow you to keep calories slightly higher, improve weight training work capacity as long as it's not excessive, and set up good activity habits for weight maintenance after the diet is over. We suggest keeping it between 1 to 2 sessions per week, lasting about 15 to 30 minutes per session, and then simply add in low-intensity cardio as needed. This will depend largely on your occupation and lifestyle outside the gym. Folks who work a chair-bound desk job might only burn 300 calories per day, while those working a more strenuous job in agriculture could burn up to 2,300 calories per day through work alone. So depending on the client, I might prescribe anything from 0 to 5 low-intensity steady-state sessions per week, lasting 20 to 40 minutes per session, while monitoring their strength and recovery in the gym. Now for mode, I generally favor lower impact cardio like walking, cycling, swimming, and the elliptical over higher impact cardio like running on pavement because of lower interference. But if the client simply prefers the higher impact options, for example, if they enjoy playing basketball more, that can certainly be balanced by considering the other interference variables that we talked about. So this wraps it up. Thank you so much for watching this video to the end. Don't forget to leave me a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video, subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you guys all here in the next one.